and their tales are both male and female Selkies. And it's part of a wider story tradition about magical spouses, such as swan maidens or white bears or dragons. And the Orkney folklorist Ernest Marwick records a saying from Orkney which goes, "The Selkies are Orkney folks' cousins, so the Selkies are Sid to me," which means they're related to me. And there are several versions of this Selkie tale about both in prose and in ballad form. One prose version being, for example, the Good Man of Vassnes from Orkney, or the Selkie Boy from Shetland, or in ballad form, there's the well-known ballad that was collected by Child, the Great Selkie of Sailscapes. That's number 113 in the Child collection. And that one also exists in a 19th century more elaborate form by Walter Denson called The Play of the Lady Odever. Alan Bruford records that the Selkie wife tale type is found in hundreds of versions along the Atlantic coast, from Ireland to Iceland, but only one from Norway, whereas the Selkie man tale, or Selkie boy tale, seems to be unique to the Northern Isles, according to Bruford again. So in Orkney, the Selkie man origin of a family lineage was used to explain a hereditary condition in some families where the skin of the palms was thickened so that the hands looked more like flippers. And so the Selkie tale has inspired a lot of modern adaptations, ranging from romantic teenage novels and fantasy and science fiction, including Star Trek up there. I haven't really seen that one. Comics, books, song, film, and TV. So I'm just going to discuss 3 texts here, and that is Eric Linklater's short story Sealskin Trousers, published 1947. George Mackay Brown's novel Beside the Ocean of Time, or rather one chapter within that, 1994, and Amy Sackwill's novel Orkney from 2013. These are the ones, yeah. So Amy Sackwill is not from Orkney, but the other 2 are, or Eric Linklater at least lived there in his adult life. And we heard this morning that the Selkie wife tale is number 40, ML4080 in the classification system. The Selkie tales are gendered so that the tales of Selkie women are different from those of the Selkie men. And the difference, of course, relates to traditional gender roles of human men and women and the expectations of how they should behave and manage their sexuality in particular. So the outline of the Selkie wife tale, as you all know, is that a bachelor man comes upon a group of beautiful women dancing on the shore at a liminal time, and he takes a seal skin, hides it so the woman has to come home and marry him. But after a number of years and a number of children, she breaks this taboo of finding and putting on the sealskin again and goes back to the sea. And sometimes she's later seen again in her seal form. Whereas the tale of the Selkie man expects an entirely different gender role. The Selkie woman must move onto land into her human husband's home, but the Selkie man doesn't have to do that. He takes on human form and becomes a beautiful and dangerously seductive man, but he's never domesticated in the same way. And there's no information about his skin, or whether he takes it off or hides it, or what happens to his skin. The skin doesn't seem to cause the same kind of vulnerability for the male Selkie. The water is still his realm, and he can choose to come and go. So of the 3 texts that I've chosen, Eric Linklater's Sealskin Trousers is about a man. You could argue that he's a Selkie man, or maybe has elements of the Finn folk man as well. George Mackay Brown's one is of a Selkie woman. Amy Sackwill's one is primarily about a woman, but her father seems to be a Selkie man or a Finn man as well, and he's also mentioned in the story. They're all set in Orkney, but not in the real physical everyday Orkney. They're in a literary Orkney with mythical qualities. Edwin Muir famously wrote that in Orkney there's no great distinction between ordinary and fabulous. And in Sackville's novel, the narrator observes, she says they don't draw the same distinction here between history, stories and myths. She said this as if to an outsider looking in. So the fable here makes the literary Orkney a timeless zone where past and present and natural and supernatural melt together. There's no real surprise in encountering magic such as shape-shifting as part of everyday life in a modern setting. So in Amy Sackville's novel, we're presented with this eccentric and rather gothic view of the islands, which draws on the tradition from Sir Walter Scott, I would argue. What happens is that an elderly university professor and his new student bride have travelled to Orkney on their honeymoon, because that's where the bride wanted to go. And we start immediately with a gothic, labyrinthine vision already at the airport, where the newlyweds walk down corridor after corridor until we reached oh yeah, here's the Selkie wife in her skin. Until we reached the deserted departure lounge in the furthest end of the building, where they board a tiny plane with 3 other passengers. And in Orkney, this Gothic journey continues by a tiny ferry where the couple seem to be the only passengers, before ending on a sparsely inhabited island in the darkness of late autumn. Whereupon the professor remarks that this must be the loneliest, rockiest, most desolate island that has yet been mapped. And then the house they eventually reach is on an unsheltered shore, creaking, rattling and whistling with the wind of the sea, moaning and whooping. And this kind of animacy continues through the novel, not only applying to the house, but also to the sea and the Orkney landscape as well. So the Orkney we meet here belongs in a tradition of the Old North. So you can see it, for example, in The Pirate by Sir Walter Scott. There's a quote from the pirate where he imagined Shetland as this remote and dangerous place on the cusp of the unknown. Again, come back to what Terry Goldman was saying about the ocean as untrustworthy and mystical. And even the language of Shetland here and Orkney, Amy Sackville's one, has a kind of Gothic quality about it. In Walter Scott, it's mordant listen to the tales chanted concerning these wonders of nature and the creatures so credulously told in the rude but energetic language of the ancient skalds. And likewise in Sackville's novel, the Norse-derived Orkney word Gjå for a coastal ravine is described as a word from an ancient language he half knows or understands. And just as Scott's here, mordant here is made to listen to stories of the kraken, the hugest of living things. It's perhaps also kraken we encountered in Amy Sackville's novel, when she says during an autumn storm that the house became a tiny cabin, buffeted from all sides, a terrible beating against the oak as if heavy tentacles would batter it down. And in another place she actually says kraken, I imagined some kraken dripping slime and black ooze and sea wrack roaring out this deep green sunken grotto to claim her. So not only is the sea alive with threatening and mythical creatures and dark torpedo-shaped seals, but the islands are also themselves alive. Reminiscent of maybe of George Mackay Brown's description of the islands being like sleeping whales. Emil Sackville writes, that the islands are a herd of cragged beasts, their scarpy backs just breaking the surface of the water, limbs and bellies and tiny primordial heads far beneath, snoozing away the centuries, sleeping their ancient uninvaded sleep, heedless while sheep and cattle graze the tough short crops that grow like moss upon them. Maybe more of a Loch Ness monster shape on this one. And such animated or living islands can come and go, to sometimes disappearing in the fog and sometimes being compared to Hilda land. The bride that knows she comes from Orkney, but she doesn't know which Orkney island she comes from. So anyway, the Selkie stories here are set in a modern setting, but even so, the defining traits of the Selkie man or the Selkie wife have to be entered into a modern framework. So in this process, the tale's traditional characteristics are being kept, while a more modern layer is added on top, and that sometimes produces a comical effect. So, for example, while the traditional Selkie wife won't tell humans her real name, and is given a human name, in Sackville's story we never find out the name of the young bride. In Linklater's story, the Selkie man uses a human name that is found in the wallet of a drowned sailor he's encountered. That's Roger Fairfield. But Mackay Brown's story has a very interesting name for the Selkie wife. She's called Mara. I thought this had a double meaning. I realized this morning while listening to Terry Gunnell it has maybe a triple meaning if we count the Married to the Nightmare tales from Norway. So that's one. The other two are the Latin word for sea, which has the effect that her true name still seems to be concealed, just as the woman of the sea. And the third one is a biblical name from Ruth 1:20, where an exiled woman named Naomi requests that she shouldn't be called that, she should be called Mara, because Naomi means the pleasant, while Mara means the bitter, and she's bitter because the Lord has dealt bitterly with her. So the name Mara serves to emphasize the involuntary state of exile that's been imposed on the Selkie woman. So a characteristic of the Selkie bride is that although she may grow accustomed to life on land, she never stops longing for her true home in the sea. Sackville's young bride spends a lot of time gazing out to sea. She's staring out to sea now. My young wife is the opening of the novel itself. You see more examples here. Josh Mackay Brown's Mara also spends a lot of time staring out to sea. A Selkie bride and a Selkie man is also set apart by their looks, even in human form. In Linklater's story, the human girl who observes the Selkie man is startled at first. She finds his appearance most embarrassing, and he's described as being naked, obviously robust, brown-hued, and extremely hairy, with a ridge of hair running down his spine, which made me first think of a Finn man, but now that I've heard of the hairy man of Scarred, that's another connection to. But then she discovers how he's not quite naked, but wears trousers of a dark brown colour, like his skin. In contrast, Mara in Josh Mackay Brown's stories is so beautiful that Thorfinn, the hero, can't take his eyes off her. The bride in Amy Sackville's story has silver hair, even though she's only 21 years old, which hangs in tangles down to her waist, and she refuses to wear any colour but green and grey. On her wedding night, she wears her bridal dress as a symbolic skin. It says she slipped from her white silk as if it were another skin, as if she's symbolically and willingly shedding her sealskin to give herself up to her human groom. She can't wear the wedding ring because she has webbed fingers and toes. In Mackay Brown's story, indeed the offspring of Mara and Thorfinn have this condition on their palm of their skins, which is a real folk belief existing in Orkney still, that there's a certain family in Stromness that has that. In both Mackay Brown's and Sackville's text, there's also an association between sleeping and the undersea realm of the Selkie. So when these sea women sleep, they, in their subconscious state, they dive down into their former realm. Of course, the subconscious and dreams being more difficult to control than the waking life. So, and the bride finally manages to have a good night's sleep only when there's a storm outside, whereas she's as undisturbed in that storm as if she's a seal swimming underwater. The two Selkie brides also tolerate exposure better than others. They don't need to wear gloves or anything like that. They have saltier tears than others. So when their husbands kiss them, they can taste the salt, which is also a feature of Linklater's Selkie man, Roger Fairfield, where the human girl who encounters him seems to draw salt from his body, which are then expressed in her tears. He's not crying, but she is. He's also revealing his Selkie nature by succeeding in an impossible swimming feat. He acquired a brief notoriety in Edinburgh by swimming on a rough autumn day from North Berwick to the Bass Rock to win a bet of £5. So now we'll get to the refreshing and humorous aspects of translating the Selkie tale to a modern framework. Eric Linklater's Roger Fairfield is said in the story to have been the first Selkie to have gained a Master of Arts from Edinburgh University, whereas Amy Sackville's Nameless Bride is maybe the second Selkie with a university degree. She studies literature and folklore, I think. Yes, but Eric Linklater also takes delight in letting his transformed Selkie man try to give a scientific explanation of his metamorphosis. He says, well, you remember, don't you, what your books say about the primordial initiatives, but it needs a footnote there to explain that they're not exhausted till quite late in life. The germ cells, as you know, are always renewing themselves, and they keep their initiatives, though they nearly always follow the chosen pattern, except in the case of certain illnesses and under special direction. The direction of the mind, that is, and the glands have got a lot to do in a full metamorphosis. The renal first, and then the pituitary, as you would expect. So you can somehow think and make his germ cells transform him into a Selkie. The Selkie is not lacking knowledge of human manners is also quite comical. First of all, they have a natural fondness for seafood. They don't want to eat anything else. Mara refuses to eat porridge. The first time Mara sits at a human table, she commits a social faux pas by eating like a seal. After refusing to eat oatcake, Thorfinn brings 2 small haddocks and puts them on her plate. At once she begins to eat slowly and tremulously as first, lowering her face to gnaw sweetly at the raw silver. Whereas Sackville's Selkie bride is extraordinarily bad at cooking. She always adds too much salt. She burns the pasta and burns the toast and everything. The first time, the professor remarks, the first time I took her to dinner at a restaurant, she ate lobster. She pulled it apart with her hands and licked my fingers. And while eating this lobster, her Selkie spirit seems to wake up because he observes that she cracks the shell in her strong hands, and then her eyes are gleaming with silver. So, although they're supposedly related supernatural species, the Selkie man and the Selkie wife tale are very different endings. Yes. Selkie man, because of traditional gender roles, is free to choose when to come to land and when to go to sea. As for example in the grey Selkie of Sailscapes, or sorry, here was the lobster quote. Here's the grey Selkie of Sailscapes. I am a man upon the land, I am a Selkie in the sea, and when I'm far, far from land, my dwelling is in Sailscapes. Roger Fairfield can also choose to come and go, can control his own transformation. He sings this ballad to the human girl as a comfort and explanation. His departure is not due to a breaking of a taboo, because he's not bound to land in the first place. And he also has the power here to transform the human girl and take her with him. So he is actually a hairy man who's leading an innocent human girl astray into the mysterious, untamed ocean. But this is reversed in the Selkie wife tale, where a human girl, the human girl has to leave her human nature behind in taking off her clothes in Linklater's tale, which is the opposite of what usually happens in the Selkie wife tale. He writes, he held her lightly and whispered in her ear, then he kissed her on the lips and cheek, and bending her head back on the throat, he looked and saw the colour come deeply into her face. Good, he says, that's the first stage. The actual change won't come until we go down. The other two stories follow the Selkie wife tale in that there's a breaking of a taboo. Mara finds her sealskin and departs, as you would expect. Whereas in Sackwell's novel, the taboo is slightly different. She doesn't find her skin as such. The taboo is that she mustn't touch the water, she mustn't go into the sea, she mustn't cross the boundary between land and sea, going into the mysterious and untrustworthy water world. And so in the beginning of the novel, she's adamant that she can't swim. She stands on the shore, she leaps back whenever there's a wave so that the water doesn't even touch her feet. And she says, no, I won't go in, I can't swim. And I'm scared of the water, I can't go in. But by page 135, she resolves that I must learn to swim. And then she goes on to expose herself to water in the safe environment of the bathtub, where she keeps her head under so long that it gives the professor a fright. She says, I didn't feel I needed air at all. And after this episode, she becomes more and more obsessed with the ocean. She watched the sea, and I turned her body to the past as if she were a covetous child, and I dragging her from the object of her craving, or as if leading her from a horror that she couldn't tear her eyes from. That's the ocean. And then the full breaking of the taboo happens on page 214, where she finally immerses herself in the ocean for the first time. And that's the quote there. She's outside on the sand, a sad slob looking out on her last day as if it were her last on earth, which it is actually if the ocean's not on earth. I recall meeting her in the doorway, emerging from her bath mist, calling to me, laughing, saying, let's dance with the Selkies, and taking my hand. I recall her eyes widening while I recall laughing at her as she twirled barefoot on the sands in her nightdress. She was singing and drinking a whiskey older than she is from the bottle, and spinning, her face tilted to the fuzzy stars. And then she ran away from me as I went to her. She set off on the run towards the sea, and she didn't hesitate. She ran right in, laughing, and then she dived under, and for a moment I could see her. I couldn't see her at all, and then I saw a white billow a few yards out where she was lying upon the water. She seemed entirely at peace, in her element, as if she'd waded out into her nightmare and found it after all only a dream. Initially the professor scoops her up and carries her back inside, but very soon afterwards, at the full moon, she's back out there again, and this time the water is animated and ready to receive her. there's the appearance of a silver line, which has earlier been explained in the book as the hilder, a line called the hilder, sometimes luminous and sometimes obscure. So with this animation, the water is ready to take her in. A silvery path shimmers into being on the water like a spell, it says. And then she goes in and she disappears. And joins the seals here. I thought I saw something moving in the moonlight, I think water, but it was only a seal, I suppose, wondering where his new companion had gone. That was the girl, well, she had been playing in the water before, and then she goes to join them. Yeah, and there's the bit about the silvery path shimmers into being. Anyway, the question of what is real and what is imagined and what is story and what is fable is still open at the end of both Linklater's and Sackville's texts. For that reason, both the narrators, the boyfriend and the professor, end up doubting their own sanity. Did it really happen, or was it all imagined? The very opening words of Linklater's stories implored on the reader, "I am not mad." And then, after having told the story of his girlfriend's disappearance with the Selkie man, the narrator describes the moment when he came upon the scene. "I heard the splash of their descent. I am quite sure I heard the splash," but he's not entirely sure. And all the evidence he can find to assert his own sanity are his girlfriend's clothes and a pair of sealskin trousers. And the line between reality and imagination or dream is blurred for the human protagonist in Sackville's story as well. The professor is confused about if it was real or not. He says the policeman wants a description. I find I cannot give one. I have no photograph. There is nothing to identify her in the pockets. We're concluding now, Andrew. All three texts here are built around the traditional tale of the seal people, the man or the wife, while George Mackay Brown's text sticks closely to the traditional tale. Eric Linklater's and Emmy Sackville's texts deliberately attempt to bring the Selkie tale into a modern setting. Mackay Brown uses the traditional tale to tell a story of exile centered on the female Selkie and bride and mother, and the tension she feels between her sense of belonging and love for her old home and tribe in the sea and her new home and family on land, which is perhaps an expression of how many women felt in a farming community where they had to move and live with their husband's family. Eric Linklater, on the other hand, has a refreshing way of transforming the traditional tale, making it into a sharp comment on contemporary life, as it was at the time, letting the Selkie express his disappointment at the way that modern humans, rather than spend their surplus resources on creating something beautiful, such as art or great thinking, instead they choose to engage in destructive behaviour, such as war. And the Selkies come to lecture folk on that. Linklater also writes a very erotic story, perhaps picking up some of the eroticism that can be seen in the dancing scenes of the traditional Selkie wife tale, but applying it to Selkie man and his human lover, as she's gradually enchanted by him. Sackville's text, the newest of the three, in turn owes its legacy to a more traditional exocentric view of the islands as remote and rugged and other, in contrast to the civilized society of England, which is ultimately derived, I would argue, from the works of Sir Walter Scott and that tradition. In all three, however, the Selkie man or wife are defined by the traits and characteristics of their species, as in the traditional folk tale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maggie. We'll just continue now, and if anyone wants to ask Frank questions, then feel free to afterwards.